Good morning, everybody. Honorable Minister, Mr. Bayo, the IPRI board chair, Fazi Satan, our board members, particularly Iksan, colleagues, and friends. It's really a pleasure to have our board meeting and this workshop to be hosted here in Indonesia. So Indonesia plays a very critical role in global food security. So Indonesia still not only has a large number of poor and hungry people, but its strong growing economy and the size of the economy can also have tremendous impact on global food security and hunger reduction. So what I will do here is to highlight some of the key issues, key urgent actions we need to take to address some of the emerging global food security issues. And obviously, I will touch a little bit about the region, Southeast Asia, and Indonesia. So I have key 4 messages for you. I hope my printout of the slides can be distributed to some of my colleagues sitting here. It's very difficult for them to see my slides. Stacy, could you help to distribute some of the copies to our speakers here sitting in the podium? The first message is global food insecurity persists, including Southeast Asia and Indonesia. The second message is food price volatility, biofuel expansion, and climate change are major emerging food security challenges. This is very much the topic of today's discussion. The third, the urgent actions are needed to address these challenges. So if we don't take urgent actions, I'm afraid more people will go to hunger and poverty. So lastly, the emerging economies such as Indonesia can play a key role in enhancing global food security. Today, many people still suffer from hunger and poverty, despite rapid progress we have made in the last several decades. Around 2000, the global leaders and many national leaders came together and committed to cut hunger and poverty between... Can you hear me? All right. Looks like you cannot see the slides. Right. But around 2000, the global leaders, national leaders, came together and committed the so-called MDG goals, so aspiration to cut the hunger and the poverty by half. Today, at global level, we are more or less on track. In the Southeast Asian regions, we are also almost on track. So the percentage of the hungry people in 1990 in the region is about 24%. So today, it is 17%. So if we use MDG goal, we should be able to reach the target of 14%. So we still have 3% to go. And I'm very confident that this region will be able to achieve MDG goal. However, even we achieve the MDG goal, so this region will still have 70 to 80 million people suffering from hunger and poverty. So even the MDG goal is achieved, we will have 70, 80 million people suffering from hunger and poverty. So this is not acceptable. And obviously, many other regions, particularly in Africa, majority of the country will not be able to achieve a hunger and a poverty targets set by MDG. We will be able to achieve the poverty reduction target, but not hunger target. Around 1990, at the global level, we had about 850 million hungry people. If we wanted to achieve MDG, the number of poor or hungry should decline to 550. But based on the current trend, we will still have probably 800 or even 900 million people suffering from hunger. So at the global level, we are off track on hunger target. But this region will be able to achieve the MDG hunger goal. So the hunger rate will decline from 24% to 14%. Right now it's 17%, so we're on track. However, even we achieve the MDG goal, we will still have 70 to 80 million people suffering from hunger and poverty. So this is not acceptable. How can we allow such a big number of people suffering from hunger? And a global food crisis will further exacerbate that problem. Just for the last 10 months to 12 months, maize price, wheat price have almost doubled. In fact, this chart has not been able to be updated. The recent data shows that since June, wheat and the maize price have doubled. These hikes are due to many factors, so natural disasters, and more importantly, panic purchase, trade restrictions, such as Russia's export ban of wheat export. In many countries, they are suffering from high inflation. China last year experienced more than 10% food inflation. This has not happened for the last 2 or 3 decades. So first time China experienced 2-digit inflation. India experienced more than 10% food inflation, and even last year experienced 14% food inflation. Although in the last 2 or 3 months, the food inflation in this country has come down. This slide further elaborates how the domestic prices have also risen in the last 2 or 3 years. You will see in many countries, particularly in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Laos, the rice prices have risen by 30%, 40%, in some cases even 80%. So the price has not only risen at a global level, it has trickled, but it also trickled down to the domestic level. And many people have felt more food insecure after the food crisis. Look at this chart. The Gallup poll shows that in the case of Indonesia, in 2008, more people have felt food insecure. In Vietnam, the percentage of people who feel food insecure increased even more by 5 to 10%. And the rising energy prices influence food security in a very large extent. If you look at the correlation between oil prices and food prices, you will see increased correlation over time. So the correlation coefficient used to be 0.4, 0.5%, but in the last several years, that coefficient has increased to 0.8%. So the oil price and the food price have become increasingly correlated. And rising energy prices will make biofuels more profitable, even without subsidies. Even without subsidies in biofuel production, in many areas, biofuel production will become economically viable. So biofuel raise food security and environmental concerns. It will compete with food availability and push up food prices. So in the United States alone, more than 40% of maize production is being used for biofuel production, and that trend will continue. In many regions, the conversion of land to biofuel production crops have increased, including this country and neighboring countries like Malaysia. So the conversion of the crops, conversion of the land from rainforests to grasslands to biofuel crops such as palm oil production can have severe consequences on climate change. For example, the palm biodiesel production, it will take more than 400 years to repay the carbon debt. But to convert the land to biofuel production will increase carbon emission. So to offset that carbon emission, it will take more than 400 years for palm oil trees to complete that process. For sugar, only 17 years. For soybean biodiesel, takes more than 300 years. So the variation across different biofuel crops is just huge. But definitely the competition between food availability and the biofuel production has become stronger than ever. Then climate change adds to pressure to food security, particularly in this region. So this region is very vulnerable to climate change. In this region, along Southeast Asia, total rice production will decline by 17% because of climate change. So given everything is equal, everything is the same, the climate change alone will cause 17% loss in rice yield. And the natural disasters undermine food security. So this region is also vulnerable to natural disasters. And natural disasters affect poor and hunger through many channels. For example, crop and assets losses, so agricultural, non-agricultural infrastructure damages, farm and non-farm income declines, and through higher expenditure costs. So you need to rebuild after the emergencies. And many countries in the region are very, very vulnerable to natural disasters. Look at that chart, the red colors. Here, China, Mongolia, India, or Indonesia, and many African countries. The food security can be undermined by natural disasters. So we needed to take some urgent actions to address emerging food security. So some of the actions may take a long time to resolve the problem, but we need to start now. So long-term impact does not mean we can wait. So first, we do need to promote effective policies and technology investments to minimize food and fuel competition. The second, provide social protection, especially productive safety nets. So this country has done a great job in doing that. During the Asian food financial crisis, the country established social safety nets to protect the poor. And that safety net played a critical role during the global food financial crisis and during the global food crisis, the previous round and this round. And the third, we have to support transparent, fair, and open global trade. So when trade is open, transparent, and we can achieve food security and poverty reduction in a very cost-effective manner. And establish a global emergency food grain reserve. Indonesia now is the chairman of the ASEAN +3, and Indonesia is really taking a leading role in setting up a regional rice reserve. And this will provide an excellent example for the global level and many other regions to think very seriously of setting up a global and a regional reserve to help the poor, so they can avoid the desperate situation. And we do need to continue to promote policies, investments to promote growth. I will come back to this issue in a little bit. And increase our investment in climate change, agriculture adaptation, and mitigation. So not just adaptation, agriculture can play a large role in mitigating the climate change. And finally, set up an international working group to monitor world food situation and catalyze action. So working together with global institutions and the national institutions here are very critical in sharing information to monitor the world food situation and to analyze the responses to act. For the last 2 or 3 decades, many countries ignored agriculture sector. If you look at that chart, you will see many spending, including spending health and education, have really increased, but agriculture has not. In this country, 20, 30 years ago, they spent 10% of the national budget on agriculture. Today, only 2.5% to 3%. So we need to reverse that trend. Increased investment in agriculture is very critical. And promote productive social safety nets. So Indonesia has been great in using cash transfer, conditional cash transfer, unconditional cash transfer to protect the poor. The good question to ask is, how can we use the conditional cash transfer or unconditional cash transfer to build the productive assets so the poor can participate in long-term economic growth. So they don't need to be protected in the future. We do have several successful examples. The Bangladesh Vulnerable Group Development Program, Ethiopia Productive Safety Net Program, and Nigeria Fadama 2 Development Project. So we have seen some successes. These successes need to be scaled up. So in the long run, we can build their capacity. In the short run, they will be protected. So they have access to food and other social protection. So my final point is the emerging economies can play a critical role in global food security. Look at the share of the world GDP of the major emerging economies, Brazil, China, India, and Indonesia. So the share will increase dramatically by 2016, so to 40 or even 50% of the global GDP. And then look at the share of the global crop production. So they account for more than half of the rice production, and a large share of the wheat, and a large share of the maize production. So these countries can easily, let's say, affect the global market through even a small share of the import or export. So emerging economies can play that role through many channels. One is a trade. So how can we make sure that trade between these emerging economies and other developing countries can help the poor in developing countries? And South-to-South investment. How do we make sure the investment from these emerging economies can also help the poor? So for the last several years, or a decade or so, the increased investment from China, India, Brazil, and gradually more so from Indonesia have the potential to increase production, to bring the technology, employment to developing countries. So how can we really convert that potential also to opportunities to help the poor? And technology. So how can we promote the technology share between the emerging economies and other developing countries? And provide a platform for mutual learning. So how these countries, Indonesia, China, India, Brazil, have used agriculture in transforming their economy. So that lesson can be shared more broadly with many other developing countries. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.